I've got my butter. It's a nice firm, cold butter, but it's not too firm. At this point, the butter, I was actually feeling the butter thinking maybe it's a little too soft, but it's actually right about the same as the dough, and they're both good and cold. Being semi-soft, the butter is going to extend really well. When I go to put this in and I roll it out, the butter will get thinner and roll out nice and evenly, and will smear inside of the dough without breaking. And we just don't want it to break. So my dough is ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of flour down, just to make sure I've got a little bit of flour. Make sure I'm not going to have any sticking problems. If you ever have paper stuck on the back, you can always flip it over like that and peel it away.
Do you use bread flour again?
I use bread flour, yeah. Bread flour is a drier flour. It has less moisture content, so it's not going to clump up as much. You're going to find it makes a better bench flour. Some chefs like to use other types of flour. They like to mix bread flour with some rice flour, even drier. Now, I'm being very careful here. I don't want to get any fat from this paper on the edges of this dough. If it gets on there, it won't seal because it's greasy, right? So it won't actually seal. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this under and try to keep that fat away from the edges of that bread dough.
So would it almost be better to go ahead and peel the parchment off?
You can, if it helps. I find the parchment helps me to handle it, but if it's getting in your way and you think it's going to contaminate the edges of your dough, then peel it away. But I peel it away as a last move, so it's right in the middle of my dough. If I need to adjust where the butter is, all I have to do is just carefully lift it, make a little adjustment. Now my fingers are all greasy. I'm going to go over here and wipe them down, get all that grease off of there, all that butter, because I don't want that getting on there and causing it to not stick. You know. Right now the top is free of flour, it's free of fat. So because of that, it's going to seal really well around the edges. While it's in that state, I'm going to take my dough and bring it over top. I'm going to gently pinch this all the way around, making sure the dough sticks together really well. And I'm trying to make sure there's no air bubbles. Not here along the seam. So when I fold it over, it should be touching the butter, and no air around the edges. Air bubbles really cause a problem because they're really difficult to deal with. They never go away. Eventually, they'll always surface. If for some reason you feel like now we've got some flour here on the surface, we want to make sure this is going to seal well. So I'm going to brush this off. Now I have my own personal kind of brush. I love this brush. I bought this at Home Depot for $9. Cheap. You know, it's meant for actually doing walls to paint patterns on it. Well, it's beautifully soft, badger bristle. It's wonderful, really great for the price. But I also have others. These are perfectly good to use. These dustpan brooms, I bought these specifically for bench brushes. And of course, these smaller brushes can also work if you need to use them.
Air bubble, Chef.
You do have a big air bubble in the corner there.
Right there. Nope, there it is.
There you
Yes.
go.
See, while I'm at this stage, I see the air bubble. I can get that air bubble out. Once it's in there, though, what do you do? What could you possibly do?
Poke it?
You could poke it. Yeah, a little toothpick, and just squeeze it out. That'll get rid of that air. But while you see it at this stage, it's really nice to get rid of it. Now I'm going to take these edges. I'm going to fold them up over, just over the top. This is going to form a nice tight seal. Keep that butter in there. I don't want it oozing out the sides. I'm a bit of a stickler when it comes to this. There's a lot of guys who just fold it over. They don't even seal the edges. And it oozes out all over the place. They make a huge mess. Like, why make a mess? So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over then. That becomes the bottom. And the weight on top of this is going to seal that joint, and it's going to keep it sealed. Now, if you think about it, where's the weakest point of, which is the weakest point of this whole seam?
Top edge.
The fold.
Or not the seam, but the...
Yeah, anywhere where we pinched it, right? It's going to be weaker. Where's going to be the strongest?
That folded over.
The hinge of the book, right? Right here where we just folded it over. So I'm going to roll toward that because that's the strongest place on the entire piece. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this. I'm going to go straight forward. I'm just going to go ahead and start rolling. because I want that butter to stay at the same extensibility that it was when I...
Air bubble. Air bubble.
Yeah, I'm going to have to deal with that in a little while. But I want that butter to spread out nice and even. Now, if it were to break, if your butter was too hard, you would see it in here. You would start to see fracture lines. It would look like an aerial photograph, where you look down, you see all those lines in the earth. You start to notice that. It almost looks like, you know, cracks in the earth's crust. That's exactly the kind of reaction you'd get if you crack the butter. Now you'll notice I've got a little bit of a lump here. I'm just going to roll it out gently. I don't want a lot more width. I just am looking for length there. So I'm going to deal with those air bubbles in just a moment. What I'm going for here is about 14 inches in width and roughly about 28 to 30 inches in length. The reason why I say that is because that's going to give me roughly, that's a 32-inch rolling pin. That's about 28 inches. It's going to give me enough length to actually do the fold that I want to do. Now, I do have an air bubble. I have lots of toothpicks. Whole box of 800 of them up here. A little air bubble problem. Just go there and release it. Squeeze it out. Just squeeze out that excess air. A little air bubble here. Everything's looking pretty good. So you square it up a little bit. It's amazing. And you guys saw that air bubble before I did. And it really shows up. You know, when you have light casting across this, it's real easy to see. So sometimes you just have to step back to see it. I didn't even notice it. There's a little one right there. So, I'm going to work it, Mike.
Showed up crazy big on the TV. Yeah.
It's best to get them when you see them, because they will show up again. Here's another air bubble. Now, how do we prevent air bubbles from here on out? Well, I'm going to go ahead and fold this, and when I do, I have a chance of creating air bubbles just from the folding process. My first fold is going to be a 4-fold. So, let me write that down up here. It's in your handout. But we're going to fold first a 4-fold, and that's going to be basically like, well, I can draw it, but it's basically a fairly tight fold. And then we have a 3-fold, and then a 4-fold, and then a 3-fold. So we're going to do 4 folds on this. My 4-fold is really simple. All I'm going to do is take this about halfway, a little greater than halfway across, and I'm going to take the other one to meet it. And I go a little more than halfway because you can see that there's a seam here, and I want to make sure that air bubbles don't start popping up. So these little V shapes that are here in the corners, I'm going to close those up, seal those shut, kind of give it all gentle persuasion to kind of push it so that there's very little in the way of air bubbles. Because when I fold this over, those little V shapes can end up being part of my new puff pastry, and they can end up being air bubbles. With it about a little over halfway, and take this then and fold it completely over. What that does, it creates a 4-fold. And it's nice and square, nice and rectangular. Now, like I mentioned before, we fold, right, and we turn. So the next time I go to do this, this past time I was rolling my length this direction, right, and my width, this is my width right here. Next time I'm turning it 90 degrees, this will become my new length, and this little distance here will become my new width. So I'm going to have to remember that. And that's one of the reasons the guy in the video made these little marks. He made a little mark on his dough to remind him where he was. Where was his last fold? If you forget, it's real easy to forget. Let's say you're cruising around the bakery, you're doing all kinds of different stuff, you're all busy, you put your puff pastry away, and you come back, do you remember which fold you did last? It's real easy to forget. Real easy, especially when you've got 100 things to do. So, remind yourself. either write it down or do like the old guys do. The old-fashioned guys put a mark in their dough. I always put it on my upper left. So as I'm looking at the dough, if it's in my upper left, I know that's the direction I'm going to be rolling towards. If it's in my upper left. If it was down here, you know, it would be in the wrong place. I would realize, okay, I got to spin that around. But I got to keep it straight. If it's over here, well, should be in my upper left. So as long as I've got it in my upper left, I know I'm in the right orientation. That's just my way of doing it, where I like to do it in my upper left. If you want to do it in your upper right, that's fine, but the idea is that you do it the same way every time, so you never forget. That means also, one mark means that's my first hole. So, I'm going to go ahead and put this on some parchment. We'll roll this up, kind of keep it protected. And we're going to put it in the fridge for another 20 or 30 minutes.